and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. The United Nations has put forward Pact for the Future in September to encourage UN member countries to step up implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The world is much lagging behind the original plan for the implementations. Green and digital transformation is an important part of the tasks. How to make sure these transformations will go hand in hand with development for the majority of the world's population is the task front and center for the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP. It is the main development agency of the UN system. After 5 years, the UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner is in China this month. I talked to him after his intensive interactions with his Chinese counterparts on cooperation and discussions on China's approach for green transformation and what it could mean for the rest of the world. Let's listen in.
We find ourselves in the year 2024 in a very strange moment in history. On the one hand, our world is in trouble. We know this from the ecological point of view, whether it is climate change, whether it is pollution. We are facing many challenges where we are forced to act very quickly. And at the same time, we also see a lot of conflicts in the world, a lot of disruption, a lot of disagreements, and the ability of the world to walk and work together is severely constrained. And yet, we also live in an age of possibility, an extraordinary moment in human history where new technologies are creating entirely new opportunities and horizons. Some of those we see already playing out here in China. And I think it is this moment of both seeing the threats of not acting and acting together and the opportunities that are out there.
Tell me about the opportunities. I'm always a partly cloudy optimist.
Well, let's start with our dependence for the last 250 years on fossil fuels. The lifeblood in our economies. Countries that find oil, gas, coal, in a sense, have won the lottery in the past. And yet what you can also see is that these fossil fuels have now brought us to a point where we're actually threatening the future of humanity and of life as we know it on our planet, in the atmosphere and the biosphere. Decarbonization has become an imperative, and I think just watching China's own enormous transition that has now begun in its energy system, electricity generation, but also now mobility, and add to that the ubiquitous opportunities that digital and now the new horizons of artificial intelligence offer us as humanity to, in a sense, make progress in ways we could never have imagined, maybe even 10 years ago. I think from technology, science, but also human wisdom of realizing that just because you have something, it doesn't mean you go on using it if it's going to kill the future. And I think this is, in a sense, a civilizational moment, an ecological civilization. It is and continues to be an idea and a vision that is informing China's own thinking about the moment in which we live now, but also the journey to the future.
A lot of detailed discussions about the future possibility regarding innovation.
In China, next year, more solar and wind power will be produced than in the whole rest of the world put together in terms of infrastructure being built. The fact that we have seen this year an automotive market, i.e. the mobility sector in China, having almost every second vehicle sold being an electric vehicle, nobody would have predicted that 5 years ago. So you can see that technology, policy, transition has reached a point of scale where, in fact, China has an enormous opportunity to decarbonize its economy, but also to become a leader in a global context in that green economy or in the green technology sectors that will drive development tomorrow.
How do you see China's strategic choice of switching the automotive industry to the electronic vehicles, for example, and also the kind of approach it's using for communicating with others about why it made the decision and what it means, this decision for itself, China, and the others?
I think China's very deliberate decision to invest heavily in cleaning up its electricity generating infrastructure by massively investing in first cleaner fossil fuels, but then also massively expanding renewables, created not only a new sector of production and industry and manufacturing, it also allowed China to very rapidly generate what economists call economies of scale. The more you produce of something, the lower the cost per unit. That allowed China to, in a sense, reduce the cost of transition. But let us also be clear, many parts of the world have benefited from that because the price, the cost of installed kilowatt hour solar or wind power has just dropped by 80%. So many countries also on the African continent today are able to invest in renewables because the cost per unit has come down significantly. So we are creating a product, but also a supply that allows a world market to rapidly emerge that has a dual benefit. 600 million people still don't have access to electricity on the African continent. Solar, off-grid technology, but also wind power, geothermal, these are all sources that will allow Africa, maybe over the next 20 to 30 years, to generate significantly more electricity, but without being dependent on imports. These are the kinds of transitions that are, in a sense, both of benefit to China, but also to the international community. And the same applies to an electric vehicle industry. China took a very strategic decision to bet on the transition towards electric vehicles, shifting an entire generation of mobility onto a new platform. It has done so very fast, and it is now entering the world market. I think it is a moment in time where the goals of decarbonization and climate change objectives are crossing each other with every country's interest to, maintain its industrial base. And there are countries that have been global exporters of vehicles for decades. They are now challenged by this rapid development, and I think we are seeing some very contradictory signals in the global marketplace in geopolitical and geoeconomic terms. But I think these are hopefully temporary disruptions, and ultimately we are a global economy that will move towards green energy, green transportation, and China finds itself now in a very privileged position because it is advancing very rapidly. Many countries are having to make choices right now that are difficult ones, how to quickly invest in new technologies, new mobility systems. And I think if we were perhaps in a slightly less polarized geopolitical moment, we would see the opportunity for cooperation much more clearly. But that is not so easy right now.
Would you say this is the growing pain, or this is the splitting moment?
It cannot be a splitting moment. Now, that may be more an act of faith if I say that, but no country, however large and capable, whether it's China or the US or Europe or Japan, no country can succeed in this day and age in tackling an issue such as climate change on its own. If you only react to short-term stress and factors, you may make very wrong choices in the long term. We need to look at each other as partners and co-investors, also competitors. Let's be clear, countries have to create jobs, they have industries. It's not that you cannot compete, but let's recognize where the problems are and not create new enemies out of who should ultimately be our partners in solving problems.
The Pact for the Future has attracted so much attention once it's being made public. What does that mean also to an organization, a development agency, a key development agency of the UN system like UNDP?
It means a lot, and I say this not because we think this will create one happy family, but to remind the world on how many things we actually agree we need to work on, which the Pact of the Future actually does. Pages and pages, it outlines what governments have agreed. Yes, we have to cooperate on these issues. This is very reassuring. Now, development is written all over the Pact, because in a strange sort of way, we live in an era where the development pathways of nations, rich ones, poorer ones, essentially require also the multilateral platform on which to cooperate. So for me as the head of the United Nations Development Programme, this Pact for the Future is extremely important because it reminds countries that we are in need of investing in each other. Yeah. And development cooperation in the 21st century is about convergence between countries, economies, societies, investing each other, and thereby solving problems such as climate change, cybersecurity, the risk of the next pandemic, but also advancing in a world where we are able to feed 8 billion people, provide enough energy for 8 billion people, or soon maybe 9 billion.
But people would say SDGs, we're so much lagging behind. given all the latest complexities, despite of early progresses. So now, how much faith should we have for the Pact for the Future, which is just another name?
Well, no, it's not replacing the SDGs. It is actually focusing attention on the SDGs. And let me also say, just because we fail an exam, we don't declare the theory of mathematics or of physics wrong. The SDGs in 2015 did something remarkable. They gave expression to an understanding that the world had to work together on these great risks to our future. We turned them into goals for cooperation, and we put targets and indicators for each one of them. Now, we planned that journey for the next 15 years without expecting a pandemic, without expecting a world that is drifting apart and becoming much more polarized, where we spent last year $2,400 billion on defense and militaries.
Oh my God, can you
and
imagine
we can
that?
hardly find $200 billion in investing in our ability to solve the great existential problems of our time. So I would say the SDGs remain a very valid and very compelling formulation of where we need to cooperate with one another. Now, I would also say we often measure the achievement of the targets and indicators by saying, well, they're not on track. I told you already, I think there are good reasons why we were taken off track, but let's also recognize that on many of the targets and indicators in many countries, there are remarkable things happening, including, for instance, on renewable energy in our world. We are exceeding what we expected would be possible. On technology and digital connectivity, we are today living in a world where soon 6 billion people will have access to internet and broadband. In 1995, it was just 16 million people. And 6 billion people is more than were alive in 1995. So another extraordinary journey of technology becoming available and driving development. So yes, the balance sheet is not where we wanted it on the SDGs, but actually they have inspired many policy changes, many investments, particularly on leaving no one behind.
How confident can we be about the potential? When you are a little bit feeling set back as a result of the realities of the world, how would you gear yourself up?
Our politics is becoming very polarized, and much of our discussion about international cooperation, investing in one another, energy transitions, is being captured by domestic conflicts and radicalization and a lot of misinformation. Yeah. A lot of citizens have lost the confidence that problems are solvable, and that creates the breeding ground for radicalization and extremism. And I think that really troubles me, because when a society becomes so divided that it can no longer take the big decisions, it cannot find the center ground, things fall apart. But having said that, I would again say we are going through a difficult period. It's like sailing through a storm. You can't jump off the ship because that's not an option. No. You need to sail on, and I think the way that I've tried to lead UNDP is to focus on the future of development, because the future always has a great deal of hope built into it. And the facts actually speak more for my view than those who would argue there is no hope. As I said, we are in the middle of an energy revolution. In the next 30 to 40 years, we will leave fossil fuels behind us. The idea that we are limited by the amount of energy we can produce is no longer going to be our challenge. We are entering an era where, with artificial intelligence, we can do medical research that would have taken 20 years to answer one question. We can do it in 2 seconds. Now, I don't want to paint a rosy picture, but the greatest risk to our future is actually we as human beings. I mean, this is something we need to focus on. And that has to do with divisions in our society, inequality, a sense of injustice, unfairness, uncertainty about the future. Those are the things that are actually really tackling the confidence of our peoples and of our societies, and that's where we have to focus on.
I've been reading your Human Development Report. I've been also reading reports coming from others, such as World Economic Forum, for example. Lately, they talk about the World Risks Report.
Well, let me first of all say, if you take the World Economic Forum's reports and also the Human Development Reports of UNDP, until 1 or 2 years ago, when the conflicts have become so pronounced and wars are happening in Ukraine, now in the Middle East, actually the top risks that leaders that were interviewed through the World Economic Forum were actually largely environmental, climate change and natural resource shortages.
Indeed.
And I think that reaffirms, in a sense, that planetary dimension I was referring to. Having said that, I think in some ways politics is perhaps not new. Our nation states have often gone to war with each other. Politics has played a part, but what is perhaps more toxic now than it has been for a long time is that there is a degree of nationalism and radicalization and polarization happening at the same time. Within societies, there is a great deal of division, and that division is manifesting itself by looking for conflicts with outside forces. And I think what we are missing at this moment is the wisdom and the courage of political leaders in our society to say, our problems within our country are not only caused by others outside of our society.
I asked the same question to the current Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, and also asked the question to the former UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And now I want to ask you, sir, also, when you travel around the world and see those political leaders, which your answer just mentioned, what did you say to them when you are talking about this important agenda that you or organization has been focusing on, and how did they respond to you?
Well, I hope I don't contradict either of my two bosses, because their wisdom has led them to lead the United Nations. Yes. I would start at a very simple level. One of the, I think, most important roles that we can play as UN officials, particularly when we have the opportunity to travel the world, see many different things, is to help countries to, first of all, perhaps judge less and observe more. Learn what is happening in other parts of the world, because there is a lot of preconception and there is a lot of misinformation. And if we want to advance, we have to also recognize and respect the other. I think our world at the moment is increasingly driven by a negative narrative. And I think that is not a self-preservation instinct. I think it is, in many ways, a moment of irresponsible behavior. And the second thing that I do is I let the facts speak for themselves. If I talk to European vehicle manufacturers, I try to point out to them that they have had an opportunity for the last 2 decades to embrace the transition towards a clean mobility economy and invest in it. Some did, some didn't. And I basically make the point that if China is now essentially committed to having its whole mobility and transport infrastructure based on an electric platform, then you can rest assured that in a matter of years, the rest of the world will move forward as well. So sometimes it's about creating, first of all, an understanding of what is happening in other parts of the world. Secondly, to help countries and leaders to see that actually good policy choices make for good outcomes.
As you know, the concept of so-called the Global South is quite a popular one, especially among developing and emerging economies. Meanwhile, you also see decades of cooperation, South-South cooperation, that is becoming very vibrant. How do you see these groups? They're trying to come up with their own solutions, trying to solve the problems that on a larger base that yet to be solved.
In part, it is an innovation economy we live in today. And the interesting thing, particularly with the advent of digital technology, is digital technology has spread much more quickly. In many parts of Africa, inclusive finance platforms emerged far ahead of many industrialized or emerging economies, because it solved the problem. People who could not reach a bank, even if they traveled for 2 days, suddenly with digital and digital finance technologies are able to transact for the first time, become active partners in the financial system. Hundreds of millions of women today are able to operate in a financial system that traditionally they would not have been able to walk through a front door of a bank. So these are possibilities, I think, that have to do with the way that we look at South-South cooperation, but also new opportunities that are opening up. But let me tell you, as head of UNDP, it was a preoccupation for me to look at the digital technology frontier as either one that we quickly help developing countries to make part of their national development strategy, or they would be left behind. Because if you don't invest in digital public infrastructure, you don't invest in your school curricula so your children become digitally literate and can operate in this new economy that is emerging, you will be a loser. And so for us as a development program today, the whole digital frontier, but also artificial intelligence, are central parts of the future of development in which we are a partner to countries to quickly learn from each other. So South-South cooperation is our DNA, because so much of it is happening across the global South, but also triangular cooperation. We see enormous opportunities for helping countries pivot into a digital economy that will be inclusive and that will create an enormous number of opportunities for employment, for entrepreneurship.
This year celebrates the 45th anniversary of UNDP in China. UNDP was among the very first development agencies of the world to be invited in China after reform opening up. So, but this 45 years, so much have changed and so much have happened. I really wonder, you know, after being the head of UNDP, after being back and forth between China, New York, and many other places around the world, what is your take of working with a country like China? Your personal takeaway, and what do you think that could mean also for the others who try to understand China if they want to?
I think something that has, from my earliest interaction with China, fascinated me is that China is not only a country, it is a culture. It is a civilization that has thousands of years of history. But it was never too proud to say, we will look across the world for ideas. We will learn from others, because particularly in that moment of opening up, China had to very rapidly change more or less everything at once in order to cope with these pressures. I think that ability of being able to look outside in order to then develop one's own way forward has been a key factor in the way that China has been able to leverage both modernization technologies, but also policy experiences, and then translate them into China's own path. UNDP was indeed very privileged to be one of the partners to be invited at that moment. And I think the trust that China had in UNDP is still something that I see in so many developing countries today. We are not an organization that comes with an answer. We are the UN's offer to developing countries to say, how can we help you in your development? And then China, in successive periods, focused its, let's say, partnership with UNDP around some very fundamental issues. There were early partnerships where we literally just took Chinese experts around the world to look at how had others done it. But take the China Council on International Cooperation, Environment, Development. It has become a forum now for 3 decades in which China invites leading experts from around the world to work with leading experts in China to look at environmental policies. And initially it was all about emission reduction and pollution problems. Then it became more a question of energy transitions, mobility transitions. Today we are discussing ecological civilization, the green economy of tomorrow. And I think this is also an expression of how quickly China has embraced transformation and modernization. But in the midst of all of this, it also lifted 750 million people out of poverty. So if you ask me for another defining characteristic of my looking at China's development over the last 40, 50 years, it is also this remarkable ability to constantly focus also on the poorest and to make that a part of modernization. And I think these are just some highlights, so to speak, of a journey that China has passed through, that UNDP has been very privileged to be a part of for 45 years. And we still believe that we are true partners for the future of China's development, because our partnership is as strong, I would say, today as it has ever been.
The economy is key for every country these days, of course. The latest situation of the Chinese economy, particularly from the sustainable development's perspective. How do you understand the latest debates people have, especially in recent 1 or 2 weeks, about the Chinese economy, the stock market, the momentum for the future, short term, mid-term, or long term, all of this? How are you digesting it?
Well, as I alluded to earlier on, I think many countries at the moment, including China, are going through a period where disruption and shocks are more pronounced than maybe in the 10 years before. Having said that, I think particularly in this moment of economic uncertainty, the policy decisions of government matter a great deal. Where is the stimulus package? In which direction should our next technology frontier go? How do we deal with the fact that there's a risk of leaving many people behind, particularly when job markets contract? These are difficult choices to make. But I think China at the moment is still very clear in terms of the direction in which it is moving, but it has to adjust in the short term to developments that are perhaps sometimes unforeseen. I think we are about to enter a very intense period of thinking about the next 5-year plan in China. I think this will be a key moment to, in a sense, test also the assumptions about the future and where China will maintain direction and where it maybe will adjust directions.
What are some of the priorities you are going to work on for the next few years?
I think the first thing is to be a voice that stands up against those who want to divide us. I think we are living in a period of great danger for reasons that we have talked about. A lot of divisions in our societies, a lot of tensions between countries. It is very easy to create conflict in today's world. And I think multilateralism, this idea of the United Nations that many people say, it's not working and we don't need multilateralism anymore. I think they are making exactly the wrong choice. We need more platforms, and I feel very privileged because I feel I work in a field today, namely development, sustainable development. It actually is the most important platform on which countries, communities, humanity will either succeed or fail. So my commitment continues to be an ambassador for more tolerance, sometimes empathy, and above all a focus on the opportunities, because they are here. We live in an age of possibility, and that is where I think we need to sometimes remind ourselves not to give up.
Achim Steiner, UNDP Administrator, what a pleasure, sir, to see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wei. It's a pleasure to be with you.
That's my earlier exclusive interview with Achim Steiner, the UNDP Administrator. United Nations Development Program is the key development agency of the UN system. He talked about his understanding of China's transformation and what it could mean for the rest of the world. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.